And we're live, back with another Boxing Squared live stream, the weekly Friday live stream. Thank you for joining me, one and all, wherever you are in the world. If you're listening on archive, thank you for joining me after the fact. And anyone who's coming into the chat, thank you for being here. Another Boxing Squared live stream. Number of topics that I did want to canvass today. Talking about the Wilder-Ortiz rematch that is set to be announced this weekend. We also had, as part of that, Showtime missing out. They've dipped out here. Let's talk about what that means. We'll get to some Patreon questions. Some of my patrons have put through some questions to be addressed in the live stream. We'll get to that as part of this live stream. Tyson Fury not proving to be a draw in the United States. Does that have any impact or ramification for the rematch with Deontay Wilder if that is to occur in February 2020? Couple of prospects back in action. It's not really a laden weekend of heavyweight fights, but some of the top prospects, Dubois, Yoka, Makhmudov, all back in action. Hello to Fabian F in the chat. He says he's first there. Yes, you are among the first that's in the room. We have Adam Fahey. Thank you, Adam Fahey, for turning up and for being a moderator for the live streams. Appreciate that. We also have Tom Schwartz. He's back in Germany fighting cruiserweights again, back to his old habits. I guess old habits die hard with Tom Schwartz. Top rank signs Carlos Takam. They are building quite the heavyweight stable. We'll talk about that as well. And Joe Joyce looks like he may face Marco Huck for the EBU title, but that remains to be seen. We'll have to see if they can actually get that fight made, because it seems like there's a little bit of a curse on that belt at the moment. They haven't actually, the last couple of fights that have been ordered haven't come off. We also have Larry Hook, Left Hook Larry, I should say, in the chat. Underworld, hello to everyone who's turned up. The Celtic Magician, big up Boxing Squared. Thank you, big ups to you as well. Christopher Scott, Chris from the UK, hello, and also Mickey Bro 27, kia ora peeps, he says. Okay, so Fabian F says, disappointing fight from Dubois this Friday, I've got to say. Well, I guess it is what it is. They've got a open shot at the Commonwealth title. It is what it is. They have lined up a pretty soft touch, and Dubois will get through this and probably another fight in 2019, but we'll get to that. So if we first start off with Deontay Wilder and Luis Ortiz, that rematch looks set to be announced this weekend during the card that features Spence and Porter, which is a Fox pay-per-view. And I'll get to my thoughts on the Spence Porter pay-per-view event and the fight itself a bit later on as part of one of the Patreon questions. But Wilder Ortiz, how are we feeling about this fight? Just simply because, it is one of these fights that at the time that Deontay Wilder announced it, it was an Anthony Joshua fight week, and he was effectively, the signal to Anthony Joshua at the time was, look, I'm booked up for the rest of the year. I'm going to be fighting Luis Ortiz, and then days later he said he was going to be fighting Tyson Fury after that. And then when Joshua lost on June the 1st, it kind of sort of seemed like maybe that had been a bit of a mistake announcing those couple of fights ahead, because the whole undisputed talk, that imploded on itself. And now we have this rematch that no one was really clamoring for. I mean, Deontay Wilder said at the time, May 28th, and this is, 3.5 months or so ago now, that he wanted to clean up all his controversial fights as soon as possible. Sure, he got a few extra seconds after round 7 or whatever it was, but in the scheme of things, was it really that controversial? He dropped Luis Ortiz, 3 times, he knocked him out. So, I think it's... At that time, in March 2018, that fight was a very good fight, very much anticipated. We didn't know who was going to win that one. Luis Ortiz heading into it was unbeaten, but he got knocked out. And since then, he hasn't really done much to, in my view, sort of warrant a rematch, but he's got one. And now he's 18 months older. He won't have gotten any better. In fact, he would have probably got worse because he is now over 40 years old. Yeah, there is some obstacles to fan interest for this fight, even for hardcore boxing fans. I'm seeing a lot of resistance to this sort of fight, and if the hardcore boxing fan is only lukewarm on this fight, and when I say lukewarm, I mean people don't want to pay for it. They would rather see this was a free fight on Fox or Showtime, not a $75 pay-per-view to see Wilder knock out someone he's knocked out before. And that's the dilemma here. That's what's going to really sort of hobble the buys in my view. But, I guess it is what it is. It is going to be announced, and we will see what happens on, it looks like it'll be November 23rd. I'll just get to the chat here. Wilder Ortiz isn't interesting from Gimme the Loot. Well, to a degree, it's interesting, but it is nowhere near as interesting as the first fight for all the reasons I've just outlined. We've got Hypers says Wilder will need another 6 months after arm injury as usual. Well, that's always a possibility. Those that right arm in particular, 7 surgeries in the last 7 or 8 years. He really, in my view, is on borrowed time in terms of the body. His prime will be starting to ebb away slowly. What is he, 34 now? 33, 34? I think he just had a birthday recently. But, he's been champ for a long time now, since 2015. Certainly his prime years are sort of coming towards the tail end of it. His body is breaking down to some degree. You got to wonder when the clock runs out on the sort of athleticism front and I'm not saying that he won't be athletic, but he just won't be as athletic as he once was. And some of those things around injuries, that sort of thing, it will take longer to heal the older he gets. It's not rocket science, it's just physiology. He can't defy Father Time undefeated. But yeah, that's a topic for another day. But in terms of the rematch, yeah, I'm not so jazzed about it in terms of a pay-per-view price, because even in New Zealand, I'm sure they will try to clip the ticket down my way. And if I was in America looking at down the barrel of $75, I wouldn't be too impressed either. So remains to be seen what sort of buy rate they will do. I've seen all manner of predictions, but it sort of seems to be around 200,000 is where a lot of people are sort of picking it. I'll just get back to the chat here. So Left Hook Larry says Wilder vs Ortiz 2 is a fight I'm looking forward to. At least it's not Otto from The Simpsons or Tom Schwarzenegger. Well, that's a good point. It is a much higher quality fight than that. Underworld, Wilder wouldn't be fighting Ortiz if Fury didn't pull out of the rematch. Yeah, well, that is true. We would have had, and I'll come to the rematch because I want to talk about Tyson Fury a little bit later on. I'll come to that rematch because I don't actually think we're looking at a much bigger rematch than the first time around. It just doesn't feel like it's grown. To me, it just kind of feels like it's actually lost momentum, not actually gained it. Okay, where am I in the chat? So I got a little bit lost here. So Raphael Dawkins Combat Radio, yes. Good morning from the UK. Hello to you, Rafi. And if you haven't checked out his channel, he does very good live streams. I do recommend you check out Raphael Dawkins Combat Radio. Billy says hi. MakeBro27 agreed. Glad Dubois is building up nicely. Fabian, what do you think about Fury Sport ticket sales? We will come to that one. Adam Fay here, have no real interest in Wilder vs Ortiz. Ortiz run is Fury-esque. What do you mean in terms of the lower tier opposition that he's faced since a big fight? Okay, so we've got David who says, great channel, always appreciate your vids. Are you still considering adding other weight classes to the channel? Yeah, potentially. I guess it's maybe this live stream sort of business is, a way that I can sort of dip in, dip out of a few other thoughts on other sort of fights, because I do follow boxing outside of the heavyweight division, and it's one of the advantages to just covering heavyweight is, one, I can cover it really in depth and cover a lot of fighters that may not otherwise get a lot of coverage. And you may have noticed some of these heavyweight mashup videos that I've been doing a bit more of. I can really sort of slot in some different pieces of news towards the back end of those videos about fighters who are doing things that maybe I wouldn't necessarily be able to do 5 or 7 minute standalone video on, but I still get to sort of mention them and what they've been doing in their careers in those mashup videos. So those sorts of videos I do enjoy doing, because I don't like to let good news for different fighters just sort of slip away unnoticed. So it's a good outlet to sort of give some other fighters a bit of profile. Christopher Scott, been too long in the making. I understand if it's going to be a pay-per-view, will flop. Well, I guess that's the thing with Showtime having to dip out here. And I did have some people coming to the channel from the video that I did, because I sort of couched it as Showtime had missed out. They'd gone up against Fox, couldn't obviously keep up with the Joneses in that context, and Fox outbid them to get the rights to broadcast the fight. And I had some interesting comments, actually. There was one sort of school of thought from a couple of people sort of talking about PBC, Fox and Showtime. It's all PBC, it's all good, it's all staying loyal. And I had to sort of, make the comment that actually, no, it's PBC is PBC. They work with broadcasters. Those broadcasters are individual companies. They're not working together, and they will do each other no favors. This was a pretty, cutthroat sort of. Fox really just had more bank. They were able to sort of, drown Showtime in terms of what they could offer. Showtime decided, well, this is going to be risky, and I think, like a lot of us, they recognize that this fight may not do so well, and their pockets aren't limitless. And this is a good opportunity for Fox to dip its toe in again, but also to try, by doing this fight, get the front running for the Wilder and Fury pay-per-view, should it happen in February 2020. Because I think a lot of us probably think that Fox may end up losing a bit of coin on this. If Luis Ortiz gets anything close to $6 or $7 million, which he would have made for the Joshua fight, I'm sure Deontay Wilder is expecting big money as well, which, might be somewhere around the 8-figure mark, maybe just short of that, or maybe just over. It's going to be an expensive pot, and once people take all their cuts and everything's paid for, you really do need a good buy rate. So if this does tank, well, maybe this is an investment by Fox to get that future fight. That's probably what it's going to be. Okay, we'll get back to the chat here. So Mickey Bro 27 says, enjoy your channel, Boxing Squared. Thank you very much for coming to the channel. Thank you one and all who's here listening to the live stream. Live stream. Hit that thumbs up if you can. I think we've got 36 in the chat here, so yeah, do hit that thumbs up if you already haven't done so. I would appreciate it. Yeah, those little sort of things, they do actually make a difference in getting videos actually a bit more traction and traffic around the sort of YouTube boxing community in terms of what is picked up and how the algorithm works and that sort of stuff. All those little things, the comments, the likes, all that, the watch time. The longer you watch, obviously, the better it is for me. YouTube thinks that the video is a good video for others to watch. So yeah, appreciate everyone who does come to the channel, watch the videos and supports the channel. Much appreciated. John Otter says, hi Boxing Squared, what round does Dubois take out Tete in your honest opinion? Much love, John Otter. Well, really, I'm sort of picking in about half a round. I don't give Tete much of a chance at all, not at all. So AZ says it should have been Kovnatsky instead of Ortiz. Yeah, I think you can make an argument for that, and I'm sure Kovnatsky would have been feeling a little bit sort of left out in the cold here. Because the one thing that is different from him to the Ortiz fight is he's fresh blood. I think there would have been more intrigue and interest just for that fact alone. The fact that we've seen Wilder beat Ortiz before makes it less interesting to start with, and it's not like Luis Ortiz has done a whole heap in terms of generating a lot of buzz and hype through his performances since his loss to Wilder in 2018. If anything, people have been pointing out, well, this guy is starting to look like he's more hittable. I think we saw in that Christian Hammer fight in March, he was eating a lot of right hands, and Hammer doesn't hit the hardest, but Deontay Wilder does. So if he starts to come through with a couple of right hands and Luis Ortiz is eating them flush, it's not going to last long. But yeah, I do think in terms of Adam Kovnatsky, I would have maybe preferred to see that fight just because it's a fresh fight. I don't think we necessarily needed to see the rematch, but I guess that's like all things in boxing and heavyweight boxing. We don't really get what we think we should get at the time we actually want to see the fight. They end up marinating it. It just ends up being the fans that are the losers. And for a fight like this, I think it's not going to really matter where you are. It's going to be pay-per-view for, in different countries. Might be a bit cheaper in some locations. Like, it's not going to be, because $75 is roughly 150 New Zealand dollars. But pay-per-views like that would be $34.95 New Zealand dollars for me to buy that, which is roughly about 17-18 American dollars. Which, in the contrast of, I guess it's what they charge, they're really charging a premium in the United States for some of those pay-per-views. It really is craziness. PBC and Fox is taking over. Fox has really actually had a pretty good sort of lineup of cards this year. They've really done quite well. They've sort of emerged after they signed that, content deal with PBC. it's kind of gone from strength to strength, and it kind of feels like there's a changing of the tide, that Fox is now the bride, and sort of Showtime is the ugly stepsister. And you look at Showtime and sort of what they've got coming up, and it's not a whole heap. And I saw that Stephen Espinosa was talking about, we're looking at our first quarter for 2020, yada yada yada, all this sort of stuff. We're still in the boxing business, but the fact that they pulled out of this fight, they couldn't, compete. It shows you that the losses, and the profit margins, all that sort of stuff is really being sort of kept on a tight rein. And I know some people have come out and sort of said that Showtime, this is the beginning of the end. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but it is certainly a case they're going to cut their cloth accordingly. They can't just shell out an extra. Those sorts of programs, it's always very contrived. I watched it. I mean, I don't really do a lot of videos based off those types of profiling segments, I guess we'd call them, just because it kind of is what it is. We know what it's designed to do and what they're looking to do. And yeah, I mean, I think Derek Chisora's, some of his, and I've seen some people, because I think some of the trash talk is incredibly bad. And the whole thing, he knows Joseph Parker's from New Zealand. He's trying to make all these Australian jokes and that sort of stuff. And obviously Joseph Parker, pretty laid back, chill dude. He's sort of seeing through that, and he's just not even batting an eyelid. It was what it was. I wasn't really expecting too much fireworks, and there was obviously a few moments of hilarity, or Derek Chisora going for shock value. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. So Raphael Dawkins, Combat Radio, not sure there was a bidding war for this pay-per-view, probably more like they were bulking at the guarantee requirements of Wilder or Ortiz. No, well, that's the bit where the bidding war part is, because PBC is playing them off against each other, trying to get the price higher. They're not just laying down a figure, they want them to obviously try and get to the highest amount. So I think that Fox is obviously, they've obviously been going back and forth, because Espinosa effectively said, it was this week that they couldn't get the deal done. I mean, to me, it's looked like this was sewn up for Fox a couple of weeks ago. So some of what Espinosa's been coming out with. So I'll get to some Patreon questions in a moment. And these chat sections, they just go so quickly. Okay, I went right back to the top. That's not going to work, is it? Looks like I might just have to scroll down and miss some of this. Yeah, I just lost my place here. So sorry about that. I will just go to a couple of Patreon questions. So I had Toby saying, what do you think, who do you think has the best chance of beating Canelo? All of the potential opponents at middleweight, super middleweight, or light heavyweight. I think part of the Canelo situation is effectively around, if you don't knock him out, it's going to be very hard to beat him. And I think we've all seen over the years that, I mean, there's been a few cards, aka Adelaide Bird, where, if you don't, really comprehensively beat a guy like Canelo, you're never going to get the decision, so you got to knock him out. I thought Triple G won that first fight. I really thought he won that first fight. The second fight was very close, but I thought Canelo just sort of edged that. But the first one, I thought hands down Triple G won it. Didn't get the decision. Okay, we've got another question here from Scott Lang. He said, any chance of getting your prediction for how the Spence versus Porter fight ends? Well, I think it probably ends with the ringing of the bell for the 12th round. I do think that this one probably goes the distance. I mean, Porter is a pretty durable character. Spence, he does hit hard. He's got good body work. He's going to be the taller guy here with the reach advantage. But Sean Porter, he really is a durable sort of character, and he might be able to, with his, unique sort of style, as Errol Spence had sort of described it. He's a man who is fighting like he's drowning. And I thought that was a really good quote from Errol Spence, but that in itself could make it hard for Errol Spence. But I do think it'll be competitive early. I think they'll be feeling each other out. But I think Spence will start taking over sort of mid to late rounds. He might end up getting a decision like 8-4, something like that. And if possible, Scott says, be great to see some regular subs predictions. And I did reply to Scott on that, sort of saying that I could work that sort of in. And if you do want to sign up to my Patreon, which is sort of weekly videos delving into different topics, topical issues, you can go to patreon.com/boxing squared. That's from as little as $1 a month. So that's a little plug that I thought I'd get in there for myself. And I don't feel guilty about doing that as well. Okay, where are we? I've really got to get back to... Okay, I think I've got to where I was. So, Blue Collar Sports TV. So, Del Boy, he is in the building. Hello to you, Del Boy. He says, what's up, bro? I'm good. It's Friday night in New Zealand. One of my favourite Netflix shows. The new season is starting tonight. So, after I get off the chat here, I will be sort of relaxing to that. But other than that, I'm doing well. And we've got a few fights to look forward to this weekend in the heavyweight division. Not big fights, but, you know, we do have the likes of Dubois, Yoka, Makhmudov, Daniel Dubois and Ebenezer Tete. That's probably half a round. I mean, if it goes any more than 2 rounds, I think I would be shocked. I'm really expecting a devastating performance by Daniel Dubois. Tony Yoka, I think that'll be a similar fight to the Wallish and Ajagba fight. I think Wallish will come in there, he'll show a little bit of ambition, he'll try to, you know, land a couple of shots of, you know, go for a little bit for broke, try to clip Yoka. Ultimately it'll be futile and Yoka probably stops him inside 6. And Arslanbek Makhmudov, and you can catch that fight on punchinggrace.com. If you don't have a subscription, it's kind of one of those things, you can never find any other streams for his fight other than the actual official one where you do have to pay for it. So that is at punchinggrace.com. He's going to be facing Julian Fernandez. That's a late call-up opponent. Tishi Buabua Kalonga couldn't get a visa. That would have been an interesting fight. He's a big puncher. Makhmudov can and does take some punches, but I think this one here will be a case of 1 or 2 rounds and it will be over. Bear in mind, Fernandez was knocked out by Tom Schwarz. That's maybe not saying too much. And Schwarz himself, he's back fighting in Germany this weekend, taking on another cruiserweight. So he's back to his old ways. And this is a cruiserweight that he fought back in 2015. And he also, Schwarz was dropped in that fight, and that was, I think it was the back end of the first round. I actually went back and watched that after someone pointed that out, that he was rematching him. So, yeah, fighting another cruiserweight doesn't really bode well for his prospects in the heavyweight division. I mean, what do you do with Tom Schwarz now? Because obviously came up woefully short at world level, has never proved he's even at European level, and he's obviously fighting tin cans mostly at domestic level. So I don't know what you do with him. I hope he got paid well for that fight with Tyson Fury. Reportedly about a 7-figure payday, $1 million or so. And I think, you know, judging by his social media, he's really been living it up large. And judging by that comeback fight that he had a few weeks ago, and he was at a career heaviest by about 15 pounds, he really has been giving it, you know, living it up large since that Fury fight. I'll just get back to the chat here before I come on to a couple of other things. Carlos Takam signing with Top Rank, and Joe Joyce and Marco Hook. So apologies if I'm struggling to keep up in the chat here. There's a lot of questions here. Gimme the Loot says they could stack up the card with good fights, but it's a lousy headliner because it's a rerun. Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, do we see too many Wilder and Ortiz cards stacked? I mean, especially this one here, if they're paying the main guys a huge amount of money, I can't see them put in a lot of money for... it's kind of like a lot of Canelo's cards, you know, often the undercards are just absolute trash. So Martin Dorfler says, Parker making a mistake once again by trying to be all friendly with that Chisora. Yeah, to some extent, that's just him. And he does always come off slightly awkward on camera, but when he's tried to act all hard in the past, this is Joseph Parker, it just comes off forced. I mean, remember ahead of the Joshua fight when they were trying to get that one over the line in terms of it getting signed, you know, all the sort of stuff that he was saying, and then effectively once the fight was signed, he said, yeah, it was all for show, I just made it up. So, that's one of those things that you don't admit. That you want the trash to be real, because if he puts up a performance and then, says, oh, no, it was all fake, we'll never believe it again. So Devon says, I think Wilder will just run through Ortiz. I do expect him to beat Ortiz much quicker than the first time around. I'll try to whip through some of these questions. What do you think about rising Greek-American heavyweight prospect Mike Latoris? Okay. Definitely one to watch. Okay, as soon as I was reading that, I just kind of thought to myself, I'm just stepping into something here. Thanks, IEB, for that one. Devon says, it's 5:45 where I am right now. That's commitment if you're listening at 5:45. Adam Fahey says, the WBO International will be on the line for Parker Chisora. You watch. Parker moved 11-4. I will do a video on those WBO rankings tomorrow. Yeah, I'm sure there'll end up being some sort of meaningless belt on the line for there. I mean, the sanctioning bodies, if they smell some money that can be made, they'll be there with some sort of belt, whether it be something that's established or commemorative or whatever, animal, mineral, or vegetable. They will be there looking to clip the ticket. So John says, with Ortiz, if he isn't on his A game, Wilder could well run through him, but Wilder seems to be totally overlooking Ortiz. Yeah, he is overlooking Ortiz to some extent, but I think most of us are. I think Ortiz, he can be dangerous and will be dangerous, but I think it's one of these sort of situations. In some of his more recent fights, he really only has looked kind of like Alexander Povetkin to an extent. He's looked sharp, for a number of rounds before looking ordinary for mid rounds. Wilder turned down 2 deals with ESPN and DAZN, being greedy. Well, I mean, some of these things will all come out in the wash, because if he ends up having a trilogy with Tyson Fury, he might end up making massive money. But at this point, it doesn't feel like they've grown that fight. And that was one of those things I had on my list to talk to. Tyson Fury failing to sell tickets on his own. I mean, what does this actually mean? So it's 5,500 tickets for the first fight, 3,500 tickets for the second fight. It's not exactly a bonanza, and not exactly a real sort of showing of support. I mean, Bob Arum's really been giving it the big one, saying that Tyson Fury is the biggest act in Las Vegas since Elvis, but really that is just a lot of fantasy from Bob Arum. I'd question his whether he's still sound of mind with those sorts of comments, because he's sounding quite senile. 3,500 tickets sold, 3,800 tickets comped. I made a comment on Twitter, and I was called a hater for this on the night. I said that looked like a very, very dark venue. The darker it is, the fewer tickets that they've sold. So 3,800 comped. That's, they must have been just giving them out to anyone who was in the casino. But yeah, certainly it's not really great for Tyson Fury. He's proving he's not a draw on his own. And it sort of goes counter to some of the stuff Frank Warren had certainly been saying, and Bob Arum, that he's this massive American heavyweight, the biggest heavyweight in terms of profile in the world, the most popular, all that sort of stuff. But when you've got a 20,000 seat venue and you can only sell 3,500 tickets in a big boxing town like Las Vegas, it doesn't bode well. I actually had a couple of comments sort of say, well, it was Otto Wallen's fault because he wasn't a name. But that sort of ignores the fact that if you account for Otto Wallen not being a name, they were selling that on Tyson Fury's name, and they couldn't do much on that. But I guess, this has been a bit of a lost year for Tyson Fury. I think a lot of the goodwill that sort of was built up with fans after that first Wilder fight, because he was riding the crest of a wave in popularity. People would come back to the Tyson Fury hype train. A lot of that's eroded away. He walked away from the rematch. And I still have some people sort of saying that it was Deontay Wilder's fault that the rematch didn't happen. Clearly Tyson Fury's fault, because he signed with ESPN and Top Rank, and they said they had no intention of putting him in with Wilder next. They wanted to have a couple of fights, build it up, and Bob Arum was talking 2 million pay-per-views on ESPN. At this rate, that still really seems very far away, because fights with Schwartz and Wallen, what have they actually done for his profile? Arguably not enough, not much. And if anything, some of the popularity that I think he had immediately after the Wilder fight, it has ebbed away. And the time to do the rematch was immediately, because there was burning fan demand and desire to see that fight then and there. But as everything, it's sort of this marination business. And I think it may have really just stalled out the sort of, building of it, because I don't think the fight's any bigger than it otherwise would have been. Okay, I'll get back to that. I'm so behind on the comments here, so sorry if I left a question or a comment here. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get to it. We've been going for about half an hour now. I'm conscious that I'm trying to keep these under an hour, because all of a sudden these things can just snake out well over an hour and you don't even know that it's gone by. So if you've said hello in the chat and I haven't responded, so it's because I've whipped past messages and I've sort of haven't seen it. So hello to anyone who's given me a shout out, and shout back to you. Okay, so where were we? 2019 Showtime feels very much like 2015 HBO. Well, there could be, I guess, if we were talking about the future of Showtime, yeah, it kind of feels maybe a little bit like HBO. Some of that came out of the blue to some extent with HBO, but I guess there's some signals, in hindsight you could have said that there was a few things that you could, how much longer can Showtime be in boxing for? I guess it depends how much pressure can others exert on them. But now that the likes of DAZN have publicly said, look, the silly money, the deals, it's over now. We've bought into the market enough now. We've got the names. That's probably going to relieve the pressure on Showtime to a degree. And some of these other outfits that are looking, promoters especially, that are signing up different boxes, it'll be more of an even playing field. Some of these hyperinflated, numbers that some fighters are getting will come back to the pack. Tommy Temper says offline already. Not sure what that's about. So I think we've still got 52 in the chat here. So I'm presuming that the chat is going. If it is, if you can still hear me, please let me know. I'm just going to scroll down here, try to pick up where we left off. So James Burrell says, I thought the face-to-face was boring. Yep, it was. Your proposed 8 for the heavyweight WBSS. I did do a video on that, but it's those sorts of videos, they really are, and those sorts of tournaments, dependent on so many factors. And the biggest one in the heavyweight division for me that is a stumbling block to those tournaments happening is money. There's just not enough of it. The sort of money that is floating around that would be for a heavyweight tournament would do very well for some of maybe the lesser catered to divisions. I mean, we saw that cruiserweights, they were more than happy to sign up, because some of these paydays that they were getting, $1 million, $1.5 million, they were well more than they were getting in title fights, that sort of thing. But you're talking $1.5 million in the heavyweight division. That's for some of the guys within the top 10, they're not even going to blink at that. They're not going to be interested. And once you take away promotional elements as well, because we have this whole siloed mentality which is going on, you've got Top Rank with its silo PBC, and then you have Matchroom. I mean, some of those things will matter. There's availability, there's injury, and also some promoters won't want to put their fighters into matchups, especially with matchmaking, that they can't control. So Raphael Dawkins says Ortiz, 2 years older, is in for a bashing in my opinion. Well, I do think Deontay Wilder is going to beat Luis Ortiz much quicker than the first time. I think, 10 rounds? I would think it might be under 6 this time around. Boxing Spectrum, do you think that Anthony Joshua can lose punch resistance if he comes in lighter, given that he's such a big guy? Well, I don't necessarily think he's going to come in much lighter. I think he was 245 or so, 247, it was one of those two for the Ruiz fight. For a couple of his earlier fights he was around 242. I think that was the Parker fight, and for me I thought that was a pretty good weight for him, and I thought that he was able to stay on his feet and box defensively, a smart game plan for 12 rounds with Joseph Parker. But the difference for the Ruiz rematch, if he tries to do that, you're still going to have Andy Ruiz coming forward knowing that he can hit and hurt Anthony Joshua, and that even if he eats a few, if he can still get on the inside and unload to the body, which will be important, but also if you can manage to deliver another punch from the gods, he might be able to catch up with him and do the same again. Scott70 says Fury, the Vegas years. Yeah, well, it might be the Vegas year at this point. Unger World says Alvis has left the building. Well and truly. Lubak says 3,500 tickets sold, Israel poor. in the context of the way that he's been talked about and the machinery that ESPN, Top Rank, and through the the company that owns ESPN, the sort of available shows and other sort of promotion that they've put into him, it's not great. Adam Fahey, Ortiz in the rematch will be out like a light inside 4 rounds. Well, he better bring a pillow then. So Rafael Dawkins, how is Fury allegedly breaking the bank when he can barely sell a ticket? I think his alleged ESPN income has been grossly exaggerated. Well, it has been reported that those fights that he's had so far, it's roughly $11 to $12 million each for those first 2 fights. So, you sort of think that the Wilder fights and a potential trilogy, that's really where he's going to make the money. So Hrgovic, Bacoli, Hunter, Romanov, Caballero, Milas, Yoka for the WBSS. And I guess it comes at that point, is it a different sort of tournament? That is it almost a tournament for prospects / fringe contenders rather than bona fide contenders? Or do they have to work with one of the sanctioning bodies to the tournament gets them to a title shot or something like that? They're going to have to, if they do it at heavyweight, they at least need 1 or 2 really good names in there to make it credible, because if it's all lesser lights within the heavyweight division or still relative unknowns in terms of the casual fan, then it might struggle. Rafael Dawkins, Combat Radio. So it's Adam Fahey's addressing him, saying it was sold as a $100 million deal. However, 60% of that money only comes out of the Wilder 2 and 3 fights. Yeah, a big chunk of it will. Okay, I'll just try to whip down here. Got a lot of people responding to each other. We've got Kay Seidemann, stuff in the house. I don't get why Ortiz in Brazil and Kovnatsky are content being shelved for Wilder's career. Well, I mean, this is the sort of spell that Al Heyman has on some of these fighters once they're with him, and no one really talks about him in terms of a negative light, and obviously he's taking care of them. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's obviously some things happening behind the scenes that we're not quite privy to, but most of these guys seem pretty content just fighting once or twice a year. John Dealey says, Kevin Johnson, when have you ever seen Tyson Fury go into beast mode? Ruben Guerrero says, do you think Fury's performance against Wallin was impressive in the sense that he nursed the cut with his intelligent inside game and his stamina let him down though? Yeah, I actually thought it was a decent effort, given he was partially blinded through blood, and the cut, and that impacted the way that he thought. I mean, I haven't really gone in on him in terms of the performance, because I thought he did well to overcome that and then to mostly dominate the rest of the fight, save for a couple of moments where obviously, like the 12th round, where he got buzzed or rocked or whatever you want to call it. But I've still got a thing with Tyson Fury in 12th rounds. We've seen it a couple of times now. Is it a case that he just can't stay switched on for that, or is it he's coming towards the end and he knows that the end is near, and he just lets his sort of mental guard down? I don't know. ESPN are using Fury to sell ESPN Plus like DAZN are using Canelo. Canelo's probably, in terms of the name recognition and the fights that he's in, I would have thought he's bringing a bit more prestige. I mean, I don't know why ESPN has signed off on, because a lot of this money is coming from them. They've signed off on Fury, these fights like Schwartz and Wallin. It really should have been at least one known name. Get someone who the fans know. It doesn't necessarily have to be an undefeated fighter, because the obvious criticism that he's had is he's bringing people up that people don't know, and that never really helps with the interest. And obviously there was a potentially negative effect from that fight, because Wallin obviously did have some skills. He fought better than many people expected. He showed up, showed out, and some people have come out and Tyson Fury has been exposed. Okay, where are we now? So Blue Collar Sports TV, Tony Yoka is fighting this weekend against Mikhail Wallisch. Glad to see him back active. Yeah, that's a sort of decent level fight. I mean, bear in mind, what is he, 6-0, 7-0? For that level, it's not a bad fight. Kind of like Dimitrenko, the fight before. But I do think that, this is over maybe within half a dozen rounds, similar to the Ajagba fight with Wallish. I think he'll come out, show some ambition for a few rounds before getting worn down and ground down and taken out. And hopefully, though, it's not like the Dimitrenko performance against Yoka. I went back and watched that, and really, Dimitrenko was a pretty soft out. He wanted out. So Timothy Thomas, haven't seen you in a while in the comment section there, Timothy. Lubak 77, Wilder will only make money on Fury fight because he won't face anyone else. Well, that's going to be in his next fight after Ortiz by the look of it. Who's your pound for pound number one at the moment? That's a tough question. Probably Terence Crawford. I mean, there's a few guys that I really do like. Obviously, Lomachenko. I think you've got Inoue. I mean, there's a number of guys. I mean, can you make a case for... I mean, especially when Usyk was at cruiserweight, that he was maybe a top 5 pound for pound. There's just a number of guys there. But I guess if someone like Errol Spence comes through, batters Porter this weekend, we might be talking about him a bit more higher up the pound for pound list. But I would like to see that fight between him and Crawford, but it's patently obviously that Crawford's on the wrong side of the street at the moment. And I guess, that's boxing politics, and that's boxing in general. That is the fight that should be made. I actually saw a poll for the Spence and Porter fight, which I kind of see as a bit of a 60-40 fight, maybe slightly more 65-35 in Spence's favour. But I saw an online poll that the PBC had done. They put it up on their social media, and it was 80-20. So not a lot of people are giving Porter much of a chance here. Okay, where are we in the chat? BS, do you think any of the top fighters heavyweight will sign with WBSS? Yeah, it's hard to sort of see that happening. I mean, you might get someone like a Joseph Parker. I mean, just because he'll want to have some good, meaningful fights in the next year, and it can be hard to get someone at that level that he needs in between big fights. And let's face it, for the next year, Joseph Parker is not having a title shot because, all the belts are tied up at the moment, either with rematches, and then there'll be mandatories for Ruiz-Joshua winner. So there are some fighters who may be at a loose end, who may, be attracted through the prospect of the tournament, but it depends how much money is on the line. And they really do have to sort of limit it to a year, because they can have those fights in February, June, and November, for example. Some fighters will be willing to sign up to that year-long commitment, but they won't want to sign up to something if it ends up rolling on for 18 months. That's the danger with some of these tournaments. Injuries and other bits and pieces, it sort of spirals out, and then all of a sudden you get very unhappy fighters. How you see Yoka Joyce going now? Well, Yoka, he's really coming back at the moment, so we're still yet to see him at a level, I think, where we're going to see him tested. It's the same with Dubois to an extent, and also Ajagba. I think we've seen Joyce at a slightly higher level. Bryant Jennings, he was still considered a contender, good contender level win. So that fight brings me to, I guess, another topic I was going to bring up was Joyce versus Huck for the EBU title that has been ordered. Whether it goes ahead, we'll have to see. I'm not convinced by some of these mandated fights, because they don't always come off. The last two for the EBU have fallen through. But that sort of fight, Joyce versus Marco Huck, that's kind of maybe the right fight at the right, I think. Other work, he went away from his jab, went away from the body punch, which had talked about. He really sort of was bamboozled by what Tyson Fury was doing. Can he put on a disciplined effort, in terms of a 12-rounder against a guy like Tyson Fury? We've seen him do that before against the likes of Berman Stavern back in 2015. But really, some of, performances like that and other ones which have gone some distance, like the Dilper fight, that's a guy that's almost standing directly in front of you, not giving you much movement, or, there's not a lot of trickery about what they do. Someone like Tyson Fury, we've seen him bamboozle Wilder, but it boils it down to, if he lands that right hand, you're in trouble. I think Fury's cut on the brow was clean like a razor cut, old professional wrestling trick, whatever that means. That's from Gimme the Loot. Well, it's 47 odd stitches for the one over, the combined for the two. It was pretty nasty work. I mean, I know Fury's put out his sort of Instagram message this week, and you could see the eye. He says it's healing well, and he's been back in the gym, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I sort of think some of that stuff, the brow cut is not such of a worry. It's the one over that eyelid that's the real question. I mean, remember that Huey Fury, he had one of those, and he was cut. He had headgear on. Sorry, just getting some water. So we're up to 47 minutes, so I've got to try to crack through this, because otherwise we end up being here forever and a day, and I don't want to, not that I don't want to be here, but you know what I mean. It's easy for these things to rack up, and generally the analytics tell me people listen for about 10 to 12 minutes, and we're covering a lot of ground, so I want to just sort of get through, wham bam, thank you man, through a few different things. And I think, Carlos Takam, that was the other topic that I had on my list to talk about. Obviously, he's a co-promotional deal between Star Boxing and Top Rank, so you've got a pretty decent stable now at ESPN and Top Rank. You've got the likes of Tyson Fury as the sort of headline fighter at the moment. You have Kubrat Pulev with a mandatory challenge. He's not going to give that up for anyone. But you have guys like Ajit Kabayal who's come in. You have Carlos Takam who's come in. You had Bryant Jennings who was already there. Jared Anderson, a former top amateur, has just signed. You've got Sonny Conto, also another amateur who's a few fights into his pro career. Italian heavyweight Guido Vianello, who's 4 or 5 fights deep. He's obviously been a seasoned amateur as well. They're really starting to build a bit of a stable. And knowing Top Rank, they're going to start rolling out through some of these in-house fights. That's Top Rank all over. So I could see Takam getting a decent fight or two with the likes of Jennings or Kabayal, something like that. And I think those guys, if they're going anywhere in the division, they need to run through a guy like Carlos Takam, who I think at this point, in terms of contention, is done. But, he can still be in some good fights. And that's why they were looking to line him up for Alexander Usyk back in May, just because he is a good fighter. He'll give you a challenge. He always comes to fight. He's always in shape. He's going to make it tough. And that's what some of these guys really do need. Okay, Adam Fahey says stream on and offline. Okay, well, I'm not sure what's happened there, if something has dropped out. Underworld, where are we? Sorry, I just lost there. So Timothy Thomas says, Underworld, I'm warning to Devon. Love the... okay, I'm not sure what you're talking about there. Junior will be sparring Wilder. Yeah, Junior Farr, he's been in a few different camps with Deontay Wilder. I'm sure he will be in a camp for Tyson Fury again. Okay, so Timothy Thomas says sound has gone. Refresh your page. Yeah, I'm not sure what's happened, We can hear you, lost you for a few seconds. Okay, well, apologies if the chat, if the stream did drop out for something here. Maybe internet on my end, I'm not too sure. Why is Manuel Charles still ranked and no fights in 22 months? Well, he's not actually ranked because he's above the rankings in the WBA because he's the regular champion. And seemingly they're going to be fighting in Kinshasa, him and Trevor Bryan, early November, Rumble in the Jungle Part 2, apparently. Okay, so I'm just catching up on the chat here. Apparently I must have dropped out for a little while, so Timothy Thomas is at chat back on. Okay, Boxing Squared, how do you see Hunter versus Povetkin going? Well, I think it's that sort of equation with Povetkin we've seen in recent fights. First half a dozen rounds, he looks pretty sharp and pretty dangerous, so if he's going to stop you and really get to you, it's got to be in that period. But I do think Michael Hunter, at this point, with 40-year-old Povetkin, from what I've seen of Hunter of late, I think he's going to win that fight, Michael Hunter, if they can make it. Where are we? Lots of people addressing each other here. What do you think of Huey's biggest downfall is? Does he need a change in trainer, or is he just not in love with the sport anymore? I mean, maybe he was never in love with it. I mean, there is that school of thought from, a number of fans who think he's only doing it to please his father. And I mean, I don't know if there's anything in that, but he doesn't really sort of seem very amped. But it's hard to know, because a guy like Daniel Dubois never really seems that amped about anything either, but then he goes in and gets the job done. I did actually see a comment the other week where someone said Huey Fury wishes he could fight like Michael Hunter does. That's what he's trying to do, but just can't do it. And I thought, actually, that's a pretty good comparison. I think he wants to fight like that, but just, for whatever reason, just can't put that fluid sort of movement, that in and out, and he doesn't have that sort of snap on that right hand that he thinks he does. Just getting back to the chat here. A cheeseburger would be good right about now. That's from You Don't Know. Well, you can always buy me one if you want. John says, okay, that's responding to someone else in the chat. So Richard says, Boxing Squared, who wins the contender tournament? White, Miller, Hrgović, Dubois, Joyce, Yoka. It's really hard to speculate on that sort of stuff unless you had, who's fighting who when in the tournament? Stay hydrated, Boxing Squared. Yes, I'm just going to have another sip of water. I think you must have written that comment about 5 minutes ago, but I will have another sip. Stream went offline for 10-15 seconds earlier on, then returned. It's all good. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm just catching up on the chat here. Some of these things happened minutes ago, but yeah, I'll just acknowledge that. So I'm not sure. Maybe it was internet on my end, YouTube. Maybe it was the connection between Streamlabs and YouTube. Reality's Voice stream is okay right now, but has been offline 5 or more times for a few seconds each time. Okay, well, I'm not sure what's been going on. What are you drinking? When was Tyson fought Salter? Okay, that's responding to someone else. Daniel Dubois was Chisora's sparring partner when he was 16. Probably was beating him up as well. K. Sideman stuff. Link's working fine here. What do you want for lunch, Frank? Frank Warren, a shoulder roll. Very good, very good. BS, I watched a very early interview of Huey's where he talked about his very early relationship with his dad and his insecurities from dad hiding in Spain. Interesting and revealing. Well, maybe this is a way that he can be, close to his father, sons and their fathers, it's a close relationship. Kevin Johnson says, there's fake fans, everyone was up White's ass until suspected pets test, then they hated, now they love him again. Boxing fans are two-faced. Boxing fans, there is, I guess with any sort of fan there's a spectrum of fans, and there can be a lot of fair weather fans. And I think, in terms of a fighter, often these comments that fans make are not in terms of the fighting ability. It's in terms of the comments that they make or the actions, the things that they do. And if, White has failed a test, I think, rightly so. Some fans are right to ask questions, and some fans have sort of soured on him to some extent because they don't know if he's clean or not. And we're still waiting. We just don't know. White is still saying he's trying to clear his name, which obviously means that there's something to clear. So it's a holding pattern. Rosansky and Gassiev might step up in 2020 to heavyweight. Well, Gassiev was already meant to have had a fight a couple of times with Joey DeWecco, but yeah, Lucas Rosansky, and when he fought Izu Agono, yeah, he put on a good fight there, and he retired Agono. He's, a lot of people don't realize that Izu Agono has hung it up. Vizio says Chisora vs Dubois, make it happen next year. Well, Frank Warren can dig out his wallet and let the moths crawl out. I think if he pays Chisora enough money, he'll get the fight with Dubois if that's what they want to make. But Chisora will not come cheap. So Richard says Hrgović versus Dubois. Yeah, that's quite tough. I mean, both have got. See, funnily enough, I wouldn't expect a stoppage there. I think that one would come down to points, and that really would come down to, I think, a battle of the jabs. There'd be a key punch in that fight. Both do have very good jabs, and Hrgović, being I think he's slightly taller man, slightly bigger reach. He's 1 or 2 inch on each, I think it is. He'd really have to be trying to work from the outside. I don't think he wants to sort of mix it up on the inside with Dubois, but yeah, that's a tough one to call. Definitely going to points. It's actually quite funny because when you do these streams, you can actually, when people have subscribed, it actually comes up in the streaming software. So whenever I do a video normally, which is, it's obviously all offline, you record, you edit, and you upload, people subscribing, you never see it. But on here, see, someone just subscribed right now, and that person will know who it is. So it's kind of like real. It literally is real time. Kevin Johnson, have you retired from the fight game? Yeah. Well, if it's the real Kevin Johnson, he's certainly going on forever and a day and making the most of his gatekeeper status. So Give Me the Loot says, I don't love boxers and my pick changes depending on the matchup. Yeah, I'm much the same. It sort of comes down to, the actual fight. I don't necessarily go with one over the other. I mean, for example, my favourite heavyweight, and this is, I guess, more of a patriotic thing, it's, Joseph Parker, but when he was fighting Anthony Joshua, I thought, just based on the way that I thought the fight would play out, I thought Joshua would win it. I thought Parker really was fighting an uphill battle, and as it turned out, he maybe sort of fought the wrong game plan on that one. Obviously the referee didn't help, but I don't think he helped himself in that one, and with hindsight maybe he would have been a bit more aggressive. Joyce or Wannen, be a bit of a difference. Wannen not even top 15 in Europe. Yeah, this whole thing about Otto Wannen, there seems to be a lot of, and this goes back to the whole fan conversation, people jump on a fighter's name after one performance. It is one of these things. Otto Wannen's still got a lot to do and to prove. Ultimately he still lost against Tyson Fury. A one-eyed Tyson Fury still outboxed him for most of those rounds. So, he really, he got some profile out of that, but he's still lost. He's still got more to do. I mean, Dimitri Salita, his promoter, is talking about Otto Wannen as a top 10 heavyweight, which to me is completely laughable. So Salty Sally says, hello everybody. Hello Sally. Timothy says, BS, should Dubois change his trainer even though he's winning? Style's just too basic for me. Textbook, jab, jab, big right hand. Well, I think we have seen him developing. I mean, if you think back a year ago in that fight with Kevin Johnson, it was very one-paced and samey. And he needed, I think, that sort of tough, durable opponent, someone who wasn't going to fall down in 3 or 4 rounds, or in his case, 1 or 2 rounds. He needed someone who was going to be able to give him some rounds. 1, because he needed the rounds, but 2, just, going the distance, it did sort of take away some of the pressure, some of the hype. And this goes back to the question earlier, someone said about fans being fickle. There were so many people coming into comment sections about Daniel Dubois after that effort against Kevin Johnson, saying that he was a hype job, and that for people to compare him to Joshua, bloody blah, and they were outraged and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes, you can have a common opponent, and it doesn't mean that, you're going to knock them out just because the other guy did. Every fight is very, unique to itself. They don't all run the same, and, obviously you got to set up your work, and that was something Dubois didn't do that particularly well, and he looked very ordinary at times in that fight. But since then, I've actually thought he's come along. He really has been developing a bit more variation with his work. So Lubak says a realistic Super 8 could be Hrgović, Kuzmin, Romanov, Rozansky, Milas, Majidov, Price, Huey Fury. Might be realistic, but I don't think the World Boxing Super Series would be very happy with that sort of roster. they're not going to want to pay guys like that for, sort of most of those guys. They're not going to want to pay them $500,000 or $1 million per fight, because those fights don't demand that. And this is the sort of rub with that sort of tournament. You might be able to get a realistic sort of 8 that you could make, but is it going to entice the fans in? Because that would need to probably be a pay-per-view sort of tournament to justify the purses that are there. And I just can't see the interest being there. That's why you need a couple of marquee names. You need even like I sort of had in my 8 sort of a realistic name I thought could be a David Price, could be a Derek Chisora. And part of the reason for that is the money's decent, but also their names. You've got to have some name recognition to try connect through to the casuals too. And you've got to think where those fights are going to be, because say if they have Hrgovic in the tournament, you probably want to have him as one of your top 4 seeds so he can get a home fight. You can generate some money on the gate in Croatia. All those sort of things end up mattering in a tournament like that, because there's the realities that they've got to recoup the money. Investors don't want to shell out for a loss. And that's the thing. These sort of tournaments can be really successful, or they can just be really downright just money sucking down the drain sort of events. Dubois versus Rodney Hernandez. I sort of think that he's sort of past that Rodney Hernandez sort of stage at this point. Hernandez is very durable and tough, but I think that's when he was around fights 5 to 10, something like that. So Junior says, a quickie before the boss back. Afternoon, or whereabouts are you, Junior? In Australia or something, or I don't know, somewhere else in Asia somewhere? Okay, we'll try to wrap this up in a couple of minutes here. I always say 30 to 45 minutes, that's the aim, and we're already over an hour here, but the chat just keeps going on. So I'll just quickly whip through. What credible fight should Wes Wallin have next? That's a good question. I would still like to see, and because he's fighting in the United States now, that's where he's campaigning. He was going to be fighting Ajit Caballero for the EBU. That was mandated. I still think they should have that fight. I like that fight. And for both of them, that's maybe about the right level for where they are right now until they move on to that next one. So Timothy says, BS, what you say about Haney versus Loma, too early. I think just logistically with Lomachenko and the potential schedule that he's looking at, I think it's maybe not necessarily too early in terms of that the fight could happen, but I think there's other things that have been stacking up before Haney was really on the radar, and maybe fights like Unification would rather see in front of that one too. And so Boxing Spectrum says, I honestly have to say that I was impressed with Wallin and the will to fight. Well, this is what we should be expecting as well, especially in big fights like that. And that's the sort of the cut and the difference between him and Tom Schwartz. When, Wallin came to win, Schwartz turned up for the payday. I truly believe that. Price versus the loser of Chisora Parker, I can see it now. Yeah, potentially. You might end up seeing that. I still see a number of people sort of saying that David Price versus Lucas Brown. But yeah, I think Lucas Brown is kind of, the fact that he was due to fight Tom Little, it shows you where his level really is right now. He's not getting back, I don't believe, to any sort of level at the moment. David Price, he will know that he can use that little bit of momentum, and obviously having that win over Dave Allen, he can parlay that into something decent or into a slightly better fight, better payday. The WBSS need a belt, even if it's a shitty belt. They have needed the WBA regular, WBA gold, and WBO global belts. They probably need some hardware of some sort. And with Manuel Char and Trevor Bryan seemingly unifying in November, maybe the WBA could be what they're after, or if they can manage to get Joyce into the tournament. And for me, I think that's a good opportunity for Joe Joyce in terms of the competition he'd been facing. But there's so many variables when you go across all these different promotional outfits, broadcasters, and whoever the WBSS works with, that's going to depend on some of the fighters potentially that go into a tournament like that. Big Baby is crying for another opportunity. Yep. See, I don't think, because I didn't list him in my sort of potential WBSS tournaments, and I forgot to mention him as someone who wouldn't be there, and his name came up a few times in the comment section. Yeah, I just don't see it. See, he will just, go for the level what he'd been working at. Bogdan Dinu, also Thomas Adamek. I think he'll have some of those, inverted commas, warm-up fights, and then try to get into, he'll try to talk his way back into a big fight with an Anthony Joshua, a top 10 fighter where he can earn a big payday. He really is looking for that big payday. I think the winner of Hunter vs. Povetkin fights Parker vs. Chisora. I'd like that. That would be good. The Matchroom, that stable's got so many heavyweights now, they've got to start actually pairing them off against each other. So Harley says, hi Boxing Squared, hello to you too. Who do you think is a good opponent for Michael Hunter is? I wouldn't mind that Povetkin fight. I mean, at the end of the year, I think Povetkin wins that, and it's a logical step for Michael Hunter to sort of get to that top 10 in the division, where, Povetkin is generally regarded at the moment. How do you see Canelo doing against the other 175 pounders? Well, I mean, with Canelo, I think he's going to be jumping up and down during the weights, 168, 160. I mean, it might be a short-term thing at 175, but, they're going to be packing his fights very carefully. Sure, DAZN has a bit of say, and they'll give him a list of opponents to choose from. But I do think there'll be some careful matchmaking. Like, Sergey Kovalev is a piece of careful matchmaking. They think that he can beat him. That's why it's been set up. Underworld, never heard of Sui. Who has he beaten? Credible. Oh, is that Martian? No, he's unbeaten, fighting, as Underworld says, absolute nobodies. Just like Wallen. It's their level. October the 4th says, at Boxing Squared, love these live streams, brother. Keep up the good work. Thank you for joining one and all, for coming to the live stream, supporting the channel. I mean, I know not everyone can get around to watching every video, but if you're only watching one, I appreciate it. Just, supporting me out on the YouTube journey, really appreciate it. Wallen versus Dimitrenko, Rosansky or Spilka. Well, I guess in terms of, Artur Spilka's pretty shot now. If he wants to prove that he's at least at European level and sort of build above that. I mean, because the best win on Wallen's record is still Adrian Granat. He's got to do better than that. And I think Salita is having trouble getting him opponents in the United States. Obviously Nick Kidd, I didn't actually fight at an amateur level to get me and the guy that I joined up with to spar a lot of the sort of 14 and 15 year olds. So we were slightly bigger, we could, a bit rangier than them, that sort of stuff. But some of those guys had been, boxing for years. So it was, it felt like, you might start off well and sneak some jabs through and maybe a right hand, but by the end of the round it was, you'd start to take a bit of punishment, because 2 or 3 minutes is absolutely killer. I know we criticize a lot of these fighters for having leaky gas tanks, but it really is. I mean, I don't know if a lot of you, I'm sure, just by punching the bag for 2 or 3 minutes, it's exhausting. So the fact some of these guys can just dance around for 12 rounds, it really does show you how fit, and the level of cardio is insane. Zhanlong Zhang making his US debut in November. I will believe that when I see it. Apparently he did have a fight in Australia just the other week, but it's not listed up on BoxRec yet, but there was an article about it. So Richard says, has Showtime betrayed Wilder by not having the Wilder pay-per-view? No, I don't look at it like that at all. I mean, they got outbid by Fox. It's not that they betrayed him or rejected him. They just couldn't afford it. They can't. If this pay-per-view is not going to do great numbers, they obviously had a financial envelope where they could sort of put up the offer. This is what we can do, and Fox has outbid them. If anything, they'll be pissed off that it hasn't gone to them. That Wilder and PBC hasn't been more loyal to them, because they spent a lot of money on that Brazil fight, and the fact that they've lost this one out to Fox, they'll be spitting tax. Smash that like button, says Raphael Dawkins Combat Radio. Yes, please. John says, I think Showtime's inability to raise Wilder's profile is a betrayal enough. Wilder needs to move on. Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's up to the broadcaster, though, to just be the only hype man. I think part of the thing that's hampered Deontay Wilder's career, because remember, he wasn't always with Al Heyman in the setup. He used to be with Golden Boy for the first, 4 or 5 years of his career. The lack of a promoter to do the sort of role that other promoters do, like a Frank Warren or more specifically an Eddie Hearn, he's missing that sort of hype man to do the tandem with. To have someone out there in batting for him in public. It just doesn't have the same oomph, from an 80-something-year-old man in Shelley Finkel, for example. Okay, so Hop says, just joining my first Boxing Squared live stream. Welcome aboard. Actually, I'm due to wrap up in the next few minutes. I think the last week's live stream was 1 hour 19, and I said this one was going to be 45 minutes tops, but it just sort of blows out here. So we'll get to the last few comments here. There's a lot of back and forth between people here. But yes, a lot of commentary on the Spence and Porter fight. I'm picking Spence to win this, maybe 116, 112, something like that. Timothy says, I'm out of here, people. Work lunch break over. Until the next time, Boxing Squared. Have a good afternoon, Timothy, and everyone else. If you're in the UK, United States, Canada, wherever else you are. Actually, I was looking at a report the other day for my analytics. The videos are watched in, it's like 164 countries, something like that. Obviously, a lot of countries, a very small amount of views and that sort of thing. But it really is boxing, even though it's still a fringe sport, still a global sport. It's still got that appeal where people all over the world are still interested in boxing news, boxing talk, and everything boxing. There might be the small hubs and all that sort of stuff, but I think boxing has been through somewhat of a renaissance in recent years, a bit more interest in a few countries, and specific fighters have a lot to play there, but hopefully things continue on the upward curve. But you never know. It's boxing. It sort of does well to fall over itself at times here. But I'll wrap it up here, and I do think Errol Spence will win this weekend. Daniel Dubois to win by brutal knockout. Tony Yoka inside 6 rounds. Aslanbek Makhmadov by brutal knockout and probably the first round. And everyone have a great weekend, and we shall catch you in a week's time for another live stream. Thank you for joining me, one and all.